one breath at a time,
Uh,
like 8 years ago, and it's in my recovery, it has been absolutely essential. You know, I've really come to hear. It brought me to Buddhism, and it's an incredible journey with Kevin. So this is Kevin. This is going to be a wonderful weekend. I'm really looking forward to it, and I think you'll enjoy it too. Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me and making all the arrangements and all this. You know, it gets complicated, and taking care of me today as well. So it's great, really great to be here. I mean, it's really lovely to be invited to a group that I didn't know about just a few months ago, and I've actually spent a bunch of time on the website of this center, and if you haven't done that, you should, because it's a great website. It's very informative, and there's a lot of great stuff that's happening here. But the thing that really moved me about a month ago, I went on and saw the Cora practice that's being done, the circumambulations of libraries. And I've been telling everybody about this, that there's the group, the Tibetan-oriented group here, because we have different Buddhist traditions represented here, if you don't realize that. And circumambulation, walking around places, is very much a Tibetan practice, but it's done in all the traditions to some degree or another. Classically, people go to Bodh Gaya in India, where the Buddha became enlightened, the story goes, and walk around the tree, you know, which is a sacred place. But my favorite one is the Mount Kailash, which is this, you know, Himalayan mountain that takes like a month or two to walk around, and people die walking around it, you know. But boy, if you do it, it's like, you know, going to Mecca or something. It's like the Hajj. It's like you know, you get so much good karma that if you die, you'll be reborn as like you know, the next Dalai Lama or something. So it's worth it, you know. Knock yourself out. No, I think it's crazy personally, but you know, I was just really touched by that, because it was so, you know, I ask myself in these times, as people say these days, what can I do, and how can I act to do something that expresses my values, that's not going to be counterproductive, that's not going to be, you know, just getting mad and yelling, you know, or breaking things. And so the idea of silently walking around a library is so beautiful, because it's like a protection practice, we're saying, like, and it's this honoring, and just all that it sort of says silently, which I love. We're going to do other stuff, but you know, I usually have, things usually start like this with me. I ramble. In 2003, before the beginning of the Iraq War, and I'm sorry I'm talking about politics, but this is the world we're in. I can't not these days, and I'm not, you know, this will be dropped. That's not going to be what this is about tonight, but just, it was a moment when I wanted to express my displeasure with the idea of going and, you know, bombing another country. And there was a big protest, and I live in Berkeley, California, so in San Francisco, which is over the bridge. So I went over, and the Zen group, which I'm not really part of, but they were just sitting, and there were thousands of people, and there was a stage, and there was somebody up there yelling about the American imperialism, and you know, if you've ever been to a protest march, and kind of the people with the loudest voices and the most kind of radical viewpoints maybe were like getting the stage, right? But there was about 50 of us just sitting on the grass silently, and I went and sat with them, and that felt more powerful than getting up there and screaming. You know, because it's like, I mean, this is a Buddhist principle that you you act in the way that expresses your values, and your value is one of peace. And yelling and screaming is not peaceful, right? Our values are love and compassion. Screaming and breaking things is not compassion. So it just felt really lovely to me, and so seeing that on the website for the center reminded me of that, and just like the ways that we can express wholesome values, and maintain a spiritual connection without creating conflict. It's not about conflict, right? I'm not trying to have a fight. In fact, we're trying to do the opposite. So tonight, I thought we'd start with a period of meditation. I'll guide that for a while, and then I guess I'll give a talk. I like to take questions and just sort of go from there, but I'll talk a little bit and then take questions. So you'll get plenty of chance to participate. So let's sit. And so if you're, we're all in chairs except Roger, so I won't worry about your posture because you're a pro. But if you're in a chair and your feet don't quite reach the ground, you might want to get a pillow and put your feet on them, because you're okay. I'm sorry. I'm not. It's nothing personal. I'm just, the classic meditation posture of sitting on the cushions is meant to be triangular, right? The butt and the two knees, and so that creates a really stable support and balance. And so the way we replicate that in a chair is that we have our butt and then we have our 2 feet on the floor. And that's why if you're shorter or you're in a tall chair, it's good to put something there so you can be stable, because otherwise you're like, that's hard to meditate. Okay. And you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze. You don't have to close your eyes if you're not comfortable having your eyes closed in a group. And take some time to just bring awareness into your body, to feel the alignment and balance of your body in the chair. You can do a little scan of the body, notice where there's any particular sensations, pleasant or unpleasant. One of the things we discover as we develop mindfulness of the body is that there are always many different sensations happening at once if we actually pay attention to the different parts of the body. So we ordinarily focus on, 1 or 2 sensations if asked how we feel. But mindfulness reveals something more complicated, a little more subtle, that the body is really full of sensation. And we want to soften, relax the body. Learning to release tension through the body is a great tool for releasing stress and anxiety. Typically, we define these qualities as mental, but much of what really troubles the mind can actually be touched and affected, sometimes released through the body. So, a critical insight, both in meditation and in our lives in general. So, softening the belly, this is one of the places we hold tension. So, as you take a breath, just feel the stomach and see if you can relax, if there's any clenching or tightening there, and see if it's possible to just let go. Sometimes we hold tension in the belly out of anxiety. Other times there's actually a vanity trying to hold in the stomach. In meditation, we're safely not in view of anyone, so you can just let it out. Also, releasing the shoulders. Sometimes we get hunched up there. Relaxing the jaw. But there's a sense of just letting go through the body. Again, it can be quite interesting to see how much holding there is in the body. Sometimes even a resistance or a fear of letting go. Somehow being tense feels like controlling something, protecting us in some way. But once we've really settled in the body, to bring attention to the breath. And the breath can become the focal point, the object of meditative concentration. You can pay attention to the breath either at the nostrils, the touch of air coming in and out, or feeling the movement of the breath in the belly or the diaphragm, rising and falling. The idea is not to shut out any thoughts or other perceptions and only be aware of the breath, but rather just use the breath as a kind of central point of awareness. The breath, when paid attention to mindfully, has a naturally calming quality. There may still be thoughts running through the mind, or awareness of sounds or sensations. But we bring the breath into the foreground of awareness. And whenever we might get lost, we come back. It's natural for the mind to wander. We don't need to judge that or comment on that or even fight with that. Just when you notice that you've lost touch with the breath, got consumed with thinking, you gently come back, reconnect with the sensations of breath and more generally with the presence of the body sitting. If you find the mind returning to the same thoughts or topics, or feels that like you're stuck on some kind of a loop, first to consciously notice without analyzing or judging, but just to notice what this theme is that's captured your mind, that has you so interested. And then as you come back to the breath, checking in with how you feel. When the mind gets disturbed or obsessed with some topic, the body and the emotional world reflect that. There's a resonance. And rather than analyzing or trying to suppress thought, you turn toward the feeling behind it and breathe with that, open to that, allow that. Feelings have no words, no thoughts. We don't give them names here. We just feel and breathe with or into. And this helps us to step away from the thought world into the silence of the realm of feeling. Oh, you know, my first book, One Breath at a Time, was published over 20 years ago, and the kind of world, the recovery world, and the Buddhist world that it was, born into has changed quite a bit. So, as well as I have as my own, orientation. So I'm not always sure where to start, but my inclination is to when talking about the connection between Dharma and recovery, Buddhism and the 12 steps. But my inclination is always to kind of go back to the beginning of both traditions, I'll say. I mean, one of the things that's changed is that um, when I started doing this work, which is over more than 20 years that I started to teach around this, um, anybody who was interested in what I was doing was either in a 12-step program or kind of a refugee from a 12-step program. And nowadays there are actually Buddhist recovery programs, right? That particularly recovery Dharma is kind of the most pervasive one, most widespread. So that some people are, doing their recovery without ever really doing the 12 steps at all. It seems like there's a lot, though, of cross pollination. I don't go to recovery Dharma meetings particularly, but what I hear is that a lot of people in those meetings kind of go to both the 12 step and recovery Dharma. I didn't, I never made an effort to start a recovery program because I got sober in AA and I thought that's how, that program worked for me. For me to sort of make up another program, don't go to AA, do this that I just made up, and I don't know if it works, but hope it works for you. Good luck. That seemed kind of, presumptuous. But anyway, getting back to how I sort of view the starting point of Buddhist teachings, which is kind of going to be the starting point of the theme on Sunday, is the Four Noble Truths and this core idea that suffering comes out of craving. And actually, in the so the early Buddhist texts were in a language called Pali, Pali, and in Pali, the word that the it's said that the Buddha used this word to um, define craving, and it's tanha, and it's translated. The literal meaning is thirst. So I always thought that was pretty amazing for alcoholics to think, well, the Buddha said the cause of suffering is thirst. But it is a great metaphor, the thirst, the craving, whether you're an alcoholic or any other kind of addict, that sense of a need, a desire, so driven, like a thirst. As I pick up my water bottle, very suggestive of my own. But that's the second noble truth. So the Four Noble Truths start by the Buddha saying that there is suffering, and then he sort of describes the different ways that suffering happens, and it's sort of odd how he talks about it because it's not really what our modern society. If we talked about suffering, we probably wouldn't talk about it in the way the Buddha does in that sutta. Uh, that birth is suffering, and aging is suffering, and death is suffering. And then he talks about how being attached to yourself, to ego, to self-image is suffering. Uh, but he leaves out, things like depression, uh, despair, uh, Um, Nonetheless, we get the point, you know, because the where he captures it, I think that we can all relate to is he says essentially not having what you want is suffering, and having what you don't want is suffering, and that kind of sums it up, right? You know, because that can be everything from an emotion to a situation to a job to a relationship to uh, really a a president. But, sorry. Uh, so uh, so that's the first noble truth, is that there is suffering, and then the cause of suffering is craving, which one of the ways I like to characterize that, the cause of suffering is wanting things to be different from the way they are, because that just automatically, you can get that right away, like, you know, because some people will debate the question of, well, it says desire is the cause of suffering, but what about, desire can feel good, and it's like, okay, how about wanting things to be different from the way they are captures it, because that just means you don't like the way things are. And if you think about desire, it's always that. It's always wanting things to be different from the way they are. And then the third truth is that there's a possibility to end this suffering by basically doing the opposite of clinging, of craving, which is letting go. And then the fourth truth is the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, the steps of Buddhism, kind of. So to bring this then over and make some of the correlations with the 12 steps, the first step in the 12 steps is we admitted we were powerless over whatever, our addiction to alcoholism, food, sex, that our lives have become unmanageable. So in the most general terms, it's the admission that we are suffering. It's the realization that we are suffering. And this, we could say, is coming out of denial, right? And so the first noble truth is saying the same thing. Because people live in denial about suffering, right? Lots of people, smiley face people, everything's great, just look on the bright side, and that's not to say, oh, life is horrible and life is just suffering. The Buddha doesn't say life is suffering. He just says that there is suffering, and here's how it happens. And there is a pervasiveness to it, and if you don't see it, if you don't admit it, you don't have the opportunity to change it or to do anything about it, right? Which is, again, the same issue with addiction. Oh no, I'm okay. I can manage it. I can, handle it. And, meanwhile, you're just, walking that tightrope and trying to hold your shit together. And it's like, it's not really working, So that honesty, that admission of the truth of suffering is, one of the connections to step one. And, our lives have become unmanageable. It's interesting to pull out a few of the things that the Buddha says that kind of connect with this. I mean, the most simple one is the Buddha pointing out how everything is just completely impermanent. Everything is in constant flux, which means you can't control it, right? There's this, I actually printed a couple suttas that I'm going to bring on Sunday for the day long on the Eightfold Path. And one of them is where the Buddha is sort of making his argument for that self is a construction, basically, and that and he says, if your body, if your body was, if you owned your body, you would be able to tell your body what to feel and how to look, right? And so, and he says, can you do that? And he asked the monk, no, and you can't do that. Your body is impermanent, and you don't have control over it. You have a modicum of control. We can, do certain things, right? But, if I had control over my body, I wouldn't look the way, I would still have hair, for instance,
That's true.
and there wouldn't be this hole in my head, uh, and I wouldn't have a knee replacement, and so that's like unmanageable, right? I can't control. I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't have moods if I were in control of my feelings. My feelings would always be good. I'd always feel great. But that, because I talk about my feelings, but are they mine? But as the Buddha defines, ownership, he says if you own something, you can control it, right? Okay. You could debate that, but that's his definition. So it's like, okay, it's not really my body, it's not really my feelings, it's not really my thoughts. I can't control any of this stuff. So it's unmanageable. I don't know if you buy that, but I think it's an interesting, thing to posit. So if we say that's step one, so step two, he came to believe that power greater than himself could restore us to sanity. Blah, blah, blah. And we can correlate that with the third noble truth that says it's possible to end suffering. And the thing that they're both saying is that there is this possibility of change. There is hope. And it's a critical thing in the steps. Have you ever known somebody who were like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, but I can't stop, right? Maybe some of you have said that to yourselves, or maybe about whatever addiction. I use alcoholism as sort of a general term for addiction. So we can see that admitting you're powerless and your life is unmanageable is not enough to get you on a path. That might be just enough to get you suicidal. Really, it's like, I don't mean to be swearing so much, but I don't. Maybe I didn't swear there. We're not sure. We'll have to play that back. It's just like, so it's a critical thing. Came to believe that it's possible to change. If you don't have that belief, you can stay stuck in the cycle, and that's really what many of us do for a long time. It's maybe not even that we don't think we could change. We're just not sure that we want to change into that. I mean, I'm sure many of you remember, like, I know this might be bad, but those people, like all those sober people, like, do I want to be one of them? And we all have these visions of what that means, right? For me, actually meeting like an interesting songwriter in LA where I was living and doing some recording with him, and he was sober. I was like, could this be what being sober looks like, as opposed to, the guys in trench coats in the basement of the churches with the weak coffee and, So coming to believe the possibility of change, a power greater than ourselves. And of course, what many people hear in that, and some people, in fact, believe that this is what the step means. If you're willing to turn your life over to the Savior, Lord Jesus Christ, you'll be able to stay sober. And which is great, if you're comfortable with that belief. And there's many people who are, and, it works for them, and it's beautiful. And for those who don't, that can be the way out the door, and certainly that was a lot of the audience that I was sort of thinking of as I wrote One Breath at a Time. And it happens that I was not actually one of those people, because of where I was in my spiritual path. I had fallen in with a new age guru who had me sort of believing lots of wild things. So when I got sober, I was like, oh, yeah, sure. It was actually only after I'd been sober for a while that I kind of like, wait a minute, do I believe in this? What am I doing? Anyway, I think that's just a very narrow interpretation, obviously. And what I'm interested in with the steps is to like see what's the meaning of this in terms of a process. What's being described here? And that's why I've kind of, looked at things like uh, the hero's journey, that Joseph Campbell talks about, and thinking about recovery as this process coming from darkness into light, or however whatever imagery you use. But this coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves, if we just ask ourselves, like, well, what's more powerful than me? It's pretty easy to find a lot of things that are more powerful than you. And obviously we're talking about this in spiritual terms. So, okay, we're not just going to say the police are more powerful than me, but how do I understand the way things really work? And so my take on that from a Buddhist viewpoint is, and this connects with the idea of the possibility of change too, is to understand the law of karma. This takes us in pretty deep, but hopefully I can explain this in a fairly simple way. So the law of karma is often misunderstood to be about fate. It's just my karma, man. That's not the actual meaning of the word karma. The word karma, which is Sanskrit, so it just means action. The law of karma is actions have results. Boom. Okay, that's the literal meaning of that. Now, in spiritual terms and in Buddhist terms, it's talking particularly about the realm of what we can call wholesome or unwholesome behavior, good or bad, but we don't really use those terms in Buddhism because they don't really work when we take the broadest view. So the law of karma, in other words, has a moral quality to it. So is that the tornado? We have to go into the basement.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me when.
No.
I've always wanted to be in a tornado.
No.
Just kidding. Come to Berkeley and have an earthquake. We had one the other night. Lying in bed when I went.
Okay, so then we will know, they'll tell us.
Okay.
Here
Here I was. I thought I was making a joke, and then I realized halfway through it wasn't a joke. Yeah. Although a lot of my jokes aren't funny, so the idea then is that, in simplest terms, if we do something unwholesome or unskillful, it's going to have an unpleasant result, and it's going to be a negative result, if you will. And on the other hand, if we do something wise and skillful, it's going to have a skillful result. So in recovery terms, that just means if you stop drinking, you won't get drunk anymore. And that's how the cause and effect works, right? And if you don't drink repeatedly, you will not get drunk repeatedly. And besides that, what's more important is that the inclination to drink, the compulsion to drink, will become weaker and weaker the less you respond to it. This is how addiction works, right? That when you do something, that the more you do it, the more you're inclined to do it. It becomes more of a habit, right? and the tendency. So this is one of the principles of Buddhist practices. If we keep letting go of craving, that the craving will get weaker, which goes against our instinct. Our instinct tells us that if I want something and I strive to get it, once I get it, I'll be satisfied. I'll be good, right? Well, addicts know that this is not true because what happens to us is I want a drink, I take the drink, I want another drink, I want more drinks, right? It builds up what's called the phenomenon of craving. And so, but there's a reverse of this, right? The phenomenon of letting go, that the craving gets weaker the less you do it. So that if you don't believe that can work, in other words, if you don't believe in cause and effect, then you don't have to believe in step two. If you believe in cause and effect, you should be able to accept step two. Came to believe that a power greater than myself, which is the law of karma, would restore me to sanity. And, again, using Buddhist language, there's three poisons in Buddhism: greed, hatred, and delusion, or desire, craving, aversion, and delusion. Well, delusion is another term for insanity. So being restored to sanity is healing from that delusion of addiction. It feels like I have to do a complicated dance to get there. In my mind, it's a very simple thing, but sometimes the language of it is hard to, spell out, which is why I write books. Try okay, can I explain this? I came to believe, of course, is also a kind of faith, it's a belief, it's a confidence or a trust, which is also something we need when we come to Buddhism. You come into a place where they say, it's going to help you to learn to sit still and do nothing for half an hour. You're like, you sure? Definitely. So you wouldn't do this. You wouldn't come here and try meditating if you didn't have some inkling, if some part of you didn't believe that a power greater than yourself, whatever that might be, meditation, Buddhism, mindfulness, could help you. So we have to have some kind of, before we take any action, we have to have some faith, some trust. That's inherent to any action. And of course, many actions we've taken them before. I trust that when I, push the button on my Camry, that it will start, that because it's happened before. But stepping into something new, yeah, there has to be this inkling. And with the Dharma, with Buddhist practice, Buddhist teachings, the people who are called to this anyway sense that there is this possibility within them, that there's this possibility of peace, which I think is what it's about. And I think recovery is about the same thing. It's about peace. That's getting off the treadmill of addiction, and in Buddhist terms, just getting off the treadmill of stress, of life, spinning us around. So a little bit more. When I talk about the steps, I usually don't get past step 7, and I'm not sure I'll even get there. But let me fairly briefly, because I want to open it up and just talk with you guys. So, step 3 then is, for many people, becomes the real roadblock, and certainly, particularly early in my teaching, that was the thing that people would come to my workshops or my classes over and over asking about that, and which is why I wrote my second book, which actually you don't have copies of, but It's available. And it's really about finding a higher power in Buddhism. But I actually, despite the fact that I spent a lot of time trying to give some ideas about what that could be, I really don't think that what's important about step 3 is to identify a name or label or explain God, you know. And that's, although that's where people seem to get hung up, right? We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. The only word I really have problems with in that step is him. God is a word I can adapt. Him is a guy, and that's a problem. But anyway, what's happening in this step to me is that we're reorienting our life, and we're reorienting how we make decisions, the choices we make. I mean, it's about a choice. We made a decision. But it's a decision to turn away from self-centered thinking, from delusional thinking, and turn towards something more reliable, which, the shorthand is God. In the Buddhist world, the shorthand is the Dharma, which means truth, but more generally means the Buddhist teachings. So then it becomes to me about trying to live in accordance with really the law of karma, or live in accordance with my values, or live in accordance with a higher set of values, as opposed to my living and acting on all my cravings, all my selfishness, all the things that I'm grasping after, and seeing that, but moment by moment, I'm pulled by my addictive tendencies, and it doesn't even have to be addictive, my selfish, the craving that's just, inherent to having a body. I'm pulled by that, but often enough, what I'm pulled toward is in conflict with what I've come to understand will actually bring peace, right? As I'm pulled towards, oh, I want this, I want to control this, I want to get this. And I've learned that getting things and controlling things doesn't bring peace. It only creates more craving. And so when I turn my will and my life over, my will is my intention. My intention now is to live in accordance with these values, with these guidelines. Turn my life over. That's my will. My life is to actually do it. That's how I divide those two things up. My will and my life to me is like my internal intention, and then my life is the actions that I actually take in accordance with that intention. So turn my will and my life over to the care, which is interesting. We often neglect paying attention to that word. There's kindness implied in this step, that we're not turning ourselves over to this, vengeful God, but that we're turning ourselves over to something that's going to care for us. Because it's true that when we live in accordance with these, let's say, higher values and selfless values, loving kindness, compassion, wisdom, when we think and act in accordance with them, it brings peace into our lives. It brings happiness into our lives. So you can see that you don't have to, in this model, it isn't about, believing in some being or some force, although the law of karma is a power. So you can think of that as a higher power. The higher and lower part, in a way, isn't necessary. It's a power. So one of the things that has intrigued me at times was the connection between step 3 and step 4. I didn't think about it until I started to teach about it. And I was like, wait a minute. I just turned my will and my life over to something. Why do I have to do anything else after that? You know, in fact, if you believe in some kind of an intervening God that's in control of everything, that once you turn your will and your life over to them, then you should be done. That should be the last step. But I mean, you know, truth is, as we know, that even people who believe in that kind of God, which again is, you know, can be a very meaningful, powerful practice. They're not passive people. They tend to be very active and engaged in life and living wholesome lives. People who are really devoted to God in the different forms that, you know, God is depicted in different religions. It's so, but in terms of this particular question here, what would be the connection between I've made a decision to live in accordance with these values, just one way to put it, and these powers. But now I'm going to kind of step back and go back and review all the, you know, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, really look into ourselves. As I learned writing that inventory, I understood it to be looking at all the harm I've done in my life and looking at the patterns of harm and behavior. So the way I've come to understand that connection between step 3 and step 4 is that I've made this decision to move forward in a particular way, but in that decision, I realize that in order to move forward, I have to actually look back first and understand the causes and conditions that brought me to this addiction. That I can't just sort of forget that and think that I'm going to become somebody different because, okay, I'm a believer now, forget it. No, I have to, because those forces, those energies, those karmic causes and, you know, conditions that are still there. And if I don't see them, they will infiltrate. You know, those are just the type of things that will cause relapse, which is why, in my recollection, I think it's in the 12 and 12, Bill Wilson says something about, you know, this is where you really overcome relapse. That with if you don't do an inventory, and I don't believe in those things. It's like if you don't do this, you'll drink. It's like no, if you drink, you'll drink. But you know, nothing else can get because you know, I've seen people do everything wrong and stay sober, and I've seen people do everything right and relapse. And so there's no magic, you know. It's if you don't do it anyway. I think we go back and we try to kind of excavate and look at and get clear about what our habits, you know, internal and external are, and what we have to kind of watch out for, you know, and what we need to work on to change. And of course, it also is where we develop our, you know, list of people that we wind up making amends to. But I think it's really about if we want to move forward, we have to clean up the past, and we have to understand the past and not think that we can just drop all that. I think that actually might be as far as I want to go right now because that's been more half an hour of talking, and I really would want to open it up and hear from you guys. So thank you for your kind attention, and we have a bit of time for questions, and certainly it doesn't have to be about anything I've been talking about. Whatever you came with tonight or whatever's up for you, I'm happy to address. You know, whether it's meditation or recovery or anything else.
As we were talking about cleaning up the carrot, we turn our little eyes on the carrot died. And then cleaning our past, it just occurred to me that we turn our little eyes over to care of ourselves.
Mm. Yeah.
That cleaning up the past has to be done with care.
Yeah.
and respect and kindness.
Mm.
And that's my biggest stumbling block.
Yeah.
When it comes to 12 steps, because it seems to be so mean, I guess, not really mean, but I can't really think the word.
Yeah.
But I had to put those two together.
Mm. Yeah. There's no doubt that there's a lot of, self-hatred that comes along with, being an addict, and it's a you're harming yourself. So, and then when you just stop using, that doesn't necessarily mean that you start liking yourself. In fact, it can be more painful because, now you're clear about what you've done. And I do have some problems with Bill Wilson's approach to the 12 steps. I feel it's very much based around his own personality, which was clearly a self-promoter and an egotist. And so his cure for that was you have to tear yourself down, kind of. And for a lot of people in recovery, and I'm not even sure it's true for him, but for a lot of people in recovery, that's just the opposite of what they need. They need to be built up, and that's why, I mean, particularly for women, like Stephanie Covington's book, The Women's Way Through the 12 Steps, I've found really, really helpful and important. It's kind of addressing that like the overemphasis on inventory as like, so you've got to constantly be looking for your failings rather than, what do you, there's also like, what about your assets? What are you doing that's good? And that's often much harder question for people to answer. If in my workshops, I'll sometimes say, okay, share with someone about all your character assets. And it's like, what's something nice, what's something good you've done, worthy that you've done, and it's important. Yeah. And because that care, that starts inside, and really 90% of it's inside, Yeah.
My sponsor, when I got to step 4, this word defect, it's just so charged.
Yeah.
Because my whole life I've been thinking, I've got so many defects and I'm just gonna live with that.
Yeah.
The sponsor said the word default,
Uh-huh.
and all of a sudden, it just changed everything for step 4, because I could imagine the balance between assets and defaults.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really useful to play with the language. I mean, defects of character is a really problematic word from a Buddhist standpoint, because it implies something solid. Like character is who you are. It's something very essential about who you are. And in Buddhist terms, that there isn't something you can point to that's solid like that. And yeah, I think it's not helpful for people to think that they are defined by something like that. And so finding language that works for us is really, really important. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. My name is TJ. Nice to meet you, Kevin. I went to rehab the fall, and I hadn't had a focus on Buddhism at all. And I didn't focus on the disease of alcoholism with the brain. And they talked a little bit about dopamine. I got all excited about dopamine, read a couple books on dopamine before.
Uh-huh.
And here on page 82, you say extreme behavior is what addictive people do. And I just wrote big here, dopamine chasers. Any thoughts on just why, and just haven't almost read the whole book, sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing. You're chasing that, which is extreme, but you're also chasing, maybe you want to meditate all the time and just have this peace. And then you mentioned one thing about the Jimi Hendrix thing, when you have that moment. I've had that too, when you've had that high, and then you come back to it. You're searching for that for years. When you get high or drunk again, you're just trying to find that. why do you think we're extreme, and why do you think that kind of stuff goes on within us? And why do we have the two urges? The craving and then the peace, maybe.
Well, I mean, I can respond to that, maybe, but I don't think it's an important question, and I don't mean to belittle what you're asking, but I mean, I think it's intriguing, but does answering that question, how does it help us? You know, because, well, I mean, the important thing to me is to see that tendency and to work against it, you know, to find other ways of being. Then, yeah, I mean, I might be able to explore where that's coming from, like the science of it is interesting. I'm not particularly personally very interested in the science. Just again, because I'm more focused, you know, in the simplest terms, like in the solution than the problem. You know, it's like, ooh, this is difficult. Like there's these pulls. How do I work with that? So yeah, I mean that's mostly my orientation. But yeah, I mean, have you read The Craving Mind by Judson Brewer? So if you're interested in this stuff, that's he's a researcher who is a Buddhist practitioner, and he's looking into the craving mind and talks about just the same stuff, the dopamine and these tendencies. So, you know, like craving is a necessary biological component for any living being. If you don't have it, if you never had craving, you wouldn't live very long. You wouldn't get hungry, so that'd be bad, you know. You wouldn't get thirsty, and you know, you wouldn't want to procreate, all that, right? So it's got this necessary function. The problem for addicts, of course, is just what you're talking about, the extreme of it. So where does it become a problem? You know, it's natural, it's needed, and it's really just, to me, on a spectrum. It's not like, oh, there's addicts over here and then there's normal people here. It's like everybody's on the spectrum. We're all connected. And some people get further out where it becomes problematic. But what causes that? You know, nature, nurture, you know. There's a very popular theme these days, and you know, if you hang around the recovery world long enough, it's been 40 years. It'll be 40 years for me in June. You see these trends come in terms of why, you know, what's the cause of addiction. Like in recent years, it's trauma. Well, I've looked back at my life, going, I mean, I guess, I don't know. Like, I didn't have a particularly traumatic childhood, you know. But, you know, if you ask somebody, have you ever, I mean, sure, life is trauma. I mean, the Buddha says birth is suffering. Well, birth is trauma, right? So to me, what the Buddha's talking about is like, oh yeah, the term in Buddhism is dukkha. You know, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering. So if I just said birth is trauma, aging is trauma, death is, then I'm basically saying, well, existence is trauma. And then I'm like, well, then it's just lost its meaning. It doesn't really have any, you know, and so, okay, everybody's traumatized now, you know. I mean, I don't know if anybody's like me, like with this, like, okay, fine. You know? Like, if we're all traumatized, then we can just like drop that as a thing, you know, and just say, yeah, life is difficult. You know, there's pain in it. It's hard to be in a body. It's hard to have sexual desire. It's hard to have a family. It's, you know, it's all hard, and for some reason, you know, some people go out on this the addiction spectrum to the extremes, and some people don't. I mean, answering why doesn't solve much as far for me. So, but I will say that TV show Cobra Kai,
Yeah,
they used one of my songs in that.
they did.
I'm also a songwriter. That's what I wanted, you know. This is the closest I got to be a rock and roll star. It's like sitting up here, which is pretty sad. But. Yeah.
I'm John Mize, and I'm the facilitator of the Buddhist 12-step group. And when we started, Kevin, there were about this many people in the room the first time.
Wow.
And about half the people there knew something about Buddhism and something were involved in some way in the 12 steps. And the other quarter were people who were involved with the 12 step, didn't know very much about Buddhism at all.
Yeah.
But they were looking for a different way to word their ways through steps 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And then the other quarter of the people were people from the Buddhist Center just come and see what's going on.
Who are these weirdos
And
there?
they're not really addicted to anything else other than being human.
Mm-hmm.
And the group itself is based on the idea that Buddhism and the 12 steps are two parallel and very collaborative paradigms for living a better life.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not the fact that I'm going to die that is trauma. It's the fact that I worry about it that causes the trauma.
Yeah.
Family dog's going to die too, but it doesn't cause them any trauma because they don't think about it.
Thank you.
John, do people know when you meet? You could say that
Sunday at 1 o'clock in this room.
in this room. Thank you.
But not this Sunday.
Not this.
Not tomorrow.
We were pushed out by one of those
Sorry.
retreats. Always happens to us.
But you're welcome to be here Sunday.
I wonder if I can ask a
Oh,
question.
yeah, question on Zoom.
Hey, how you doing? I'm getting feedback echo here a little bit. I wanted to mention that in how it works, it does say rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. So, yeah, I've seen, you know, I thought I was doing everything right too, and I relapsed. And like you said, I've seen other people do everything wrong and they're still sober. So, I guess it's a mystery, but I wanted to point out that for me, the 4th step has been, you know, an uncovering as I go through my sobriety. And I've done several, and I likely will do more if I continue living. And it's been an uncovering more of my habits of mind, because I think for me, it kind of starts there. What have I habitually thought my entire life, and how do I adjust that so that I can show up in the world better? And, you know, the other part of step 4 is getting rid of all that garbage so that I can show up to be of better service. And I love how my sponsor really pushes service. She's a thumper. She's got 48 years of sobriety. I'm also originally from California. So I have, you and I probably share the similar political beliefs. And anyway, she's saying that she thumps, and she's all about habits of mind. And she's been a gift in me for me to kind of delve into Buddhism, and not taking anything away ever from Bill W. and Dr. Bob and the other authors of the big book, which is likely divinely inspired in my opinion. But it does have its limits. And I think it's important to look at where we came from in order to see which path we want to take. And if it weren't for AA, I would never have developed any kind of Buddhist practice, or even it would never have occurred to me to even be Buddhist. So anyway, I think I'm rambling along here. I guess what my question might be for you is habits of mind, and what that means for you.
Yeah, one of the ways I kind of characterize, you know, Buddhist meditation is like, you know, a mindful inventory, or an inventory of our own mind, and that's definitely an ongoing process of uncovering that and understanding that. And I mean, it's kind of that. It's interesting that how we kind of view meditation in terms of, typically when we first learn meditation or get instruction, people tend to think that what they're trying to learn to do is stop thinking. And yet, it's actually through seeing our thoughts that we learn so much, and just as you're describing, that reflection on, wow, there's that thought again. Where's that coming from? Where's that leading to? And why does that keep showing up? And what does that feel like? And how can I let that go? And is there some benefit of that? Or all of that is really where certainly the personal insights of Buddhism sort of open up through that, and it's a tricky process because we have such a tendency to just proliferate in our thinking that we can think that we are meditating on something and really just be, creating more story. So it's a delicate process, learning to watch the mind, reflect on the mind, without getting caught up in everything that's showing up. Ongoing challenge. I mean, it's not like we perfect that. But I will say, because I feel like I've kind of, opened up one door, is to say that's one, as I said, that's kind of how we work at kind of the level of personal insight. But the Dharma points us then to the impersonal insight, which is to see that whatever is going on in the mind, it is impersonal. It is not me. There is not a self that's being expressed. It's just sort of habits and, tendencies. It's impermanent, it's impersonal, and it's unsatisfactory. These are the three characteristics classically in Buddhism. And so that it's important in Buddhist practice to balance these two, the personal and the reflection on like my habits of mind, the things that show up for me, and then the more universal insights into, classically we just say impermanence, suffering, and not self, the three characteristics. And to kind of have a balance between them, because if we get too into the impersonal insights, we lose touch with the ways we are manifesting as a human being. And we kind of lose touch. We can lose touch with just the practical realities of life. But we can also, as some great teachers who were flawed human beings, not see that we need to deal with the human flaws as well as those insights. That's 5 minutes before we close down. Fair enough. So one more question before we do a little closing ceremony. Yeah.
You must be working on another book. What are you writing about?
Well, before I tell you that, I just will say that I write because I'm a writer, and I think I'm a writer because it's what keeps me sane. I don't really do it for much. That's my main motivation. So I just keep writing stuff, and it's gotten kind of ridiculous. You know, I mean, I have now 7 published books, and as I was telling Roger this afternoon, I also have a number of unpublished novels. But I felt a lot better when I saw, because I sometimes do this crossword puzzle in the New York Times, and the Sunday crossword puzzle in the Times always gives a little biography of the person who created the puzzle. And this one guy recently had said, and he's written 50 unpublished novels. And I thought, and he was like, I think I might have a problem. And I was like, at least I'm not that bad. You know, it's like, right? It's like, at least I don't drink first thing in the morning, you know. So I kind of, last year was kind of a difficult year in some ways, some health stuff, and I'm getting old, as you know, some of you are too. I don't want to like, you know, try to suggest that I'm, you know, special. But I really found like, I don't know if I'm going to write. My brain might be getting just foggy, but I did sort of have I got an idea for a book in February when I was doing a self-retreat. So I'm just writing about letting go. It's right now, the title is Let It Go. It's funny how, you know, the beautiful thing about the Dharma is that you can take any idea and start to look at things, and everything expands from one simple idea. I mean, it's the same thing, like with addiction. Oh, take addiction and go into the Dharma, and it's all there, right? Just let it go. Okay, I can just talk about everything, right? It's fun. So I'm working on that, but I don't know what'll happen with it. You know, I did write something that I thought was going to be a book last year, and then I got stuck, which almost never happens to me. So that's where I got like, ooh, this could be bad. Anyway, so let's close with a little bit of metta, loving kindness practice. And there's the classic sutta, the Buddha's words on loving kindness, and there's a couple of lines there that I like to just repeat. I repeat them to myself. I'll repeat them aloud for you as a reflection and something to kind of open us and help us to connect with a sense of a just wide-reaching and boundless loving kindness. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outward and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will. May all beings be free from addictive craving and addictive behavior. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings know peace, serenity. and love. All right. Well, thank you for coming. We will be here tomorrow from 10 to 5, and